Going to be finished at 15, moving into 16 today. So just reviewing what we talked about last time is that legalism that we've addressed so many times here with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because now they're evaluating the fact that you know Jesus's disciples were not honoring the tradition by washing their hands before they eat bread, because that was a ritual. It wasn't just common sense, but it was a ritual. And Jesus answered and said, "Why do you yourselves transgress the commandment of God for the sake of a tradition? For God said, honor your mother and father, and he who speaks evil of father and mother is to be put to death." That's a little extreme, huh? But you say, whoever says to his father and mother, whatever I have that would help you has been given to God. So he is not to honor his mother and father. And by this you have invalidated the word of God for the sake of your tradition. So he's confronting them following the Talmud or the Mishnah instead of the Torah, because what they're following was their perspective or their commentary of the Torah instead of the Torah itself. So he's really making that point strongly here, because they made a rule that, hey, whatever we give to God is God's. I can't give it to men, but I can spend it on whatever I want. And so he's just showing that they are following the letter of the law, but breaking the heart of it. So that's going back just to kind of get you back up to speed on where we left off. So now Jesus is going to give a plain explanation to the disciples and to the crowds. And he said to them, hear and understand. I've been talking all these parables. You guys aren't getting it. So I'm going to spell it out clearly for those of you that are still with me. It is not what enters into the mouth that defiles the man, but what proceeds out of the mouth that defiles the man. Now, here's the thing that's interesting about it. In the actual Torah, it does say that what you put in your mouth, because they're talking about clean and unclean animals, whatever you put in your mouth defiles a man, clean or unclean. However, this was to protect them from eating things that back then would have, from a dietary perspective, been really bad for them. We can do now, because of how we prepare food, how we sterilize things, and how we do all that. We can eat pork in a healthy manner and all those different things. Back then, it was a high risk. So it was in the law, but he just made the point that you don't understand the heart of the law. The letter of the law, yeah, was broken, but the heart of the law wasn't. And because they were doing it for dietary restrictions to keep people healthy, but they made it into a religious thing. And so he's making this point that even though it does say that, that was more of a physical, sickness issue. But really what defiles you is what comes from within, which goes back to the point that we talked about in Matthew 5:20, that if you do not exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, then you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. He's saying your thought life, the intent of your heart, your motives, the inner working of your spirit, that is what truly matters. So he's just double downing on this. When the disciples came, verse 12, it said to him, well, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard the statement, saying, I don't know why you're talking this. You're making people mad, basically. And Jesus answered and said, every plant which my heavenly Father did not plant shall be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. And if a blind man guides a blind man, both will fall into the pit. He's been really clear now. And this goes back to a principle that we've talked about in the past out of Luke chapter 10, verse 5. That's the man of peace principle. Is our goal here is to bear witness to the truth. It is not try to not offend or to try to colorize what we say so we don't upset people. In fact, that's one of the things actually in our worship service this morning, the church I'm attending, that they talked about is that one of the things that holds people back is the fear of man. It's the fear of being rejected by others. Jesus clearly isn't upset by that at all. But the concern is that we're more concerned about how other people see us in this world than we are on what God is calling us to do. And he said, I want you to go make disciples in Matthew 28, which we haven't gotten there yet, but it's there, I promise. So that's one of the biggest things. One of the things I've been doing with One Friend Focus is trying to make people face their fears and overcome the complexities we've created for them to just share with people, the change in their lives that Christ has done. So he is saying here, the intention of the heart is the most important aspect of the law. So he said, hey, leave him alone. I'm not here to convince him. We're not in a convincing game. What we are is we're in a sorting game. Who wants to hear what we have to say? But how do we know if they want to hear it if we don't say it? So there's this old adage, that I think was attributed to Francis of Assisi. It said, preach the gospel at all times, but when necessary, use words. And everybody loves that statement. Oh, that's so profound because, we don't have to talk about Jesus. We just need to show Jesus. Well, you need to speak and walk it, right? So we need to do both. It's not a cop-out, but people will grab that so they don't have to share their heart and their devotion to Christ. I say you do. And walk the walk. It's not one or the other, it's both. All right. So anyway, moving on to the next verse here in 15. This is talking about, Peter is asking for more explanation about that because he followed the law his whole life. So Peter said to him, explain this parable to us. Jesus said, are you still lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes into the stomach? He's just giving him a medical lesson here and then is eliminated. We don't have to talk about what that looks like. But the things that proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and those defile the man. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, theft, false witness, slanders. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man. So let me come back to that. Okay, sorry about that. Didn't mean to do that. Sorry. He had to spell it out because Peter, that didn't make any sense because the Torah does say don't eat, unclean animals and yada yada. So he was missing the point. So he needed an explanation that our whole thing with the kingdom of God is the heart of man. It's not our behaviors. Our behaviors change when our heart changes. It's not the other way around. We don't change our heart by behaving better. If we could do that, we wouldn't have needed Jesus. So that's probably the biggest issue that he's bringing on is the heart is the whole issue. So that is the mindset we have today. Actually, the original translations, what what we call the heart, they used to call the gut. It's like, oh, I've got something in my gut's just not right. But our languaging in modern days is more about the heart, but speaking of the same issue. Now, here's one that a lot of people struggle with. This is the Syrophoenician woman. Jesus went away from there, verse 21, and withdrew into the district of Tyre and Sidon. And a Canaanite woman from that region came out and began to cry out, saying, have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is cruelly demon-possessed. Now you have to understand what a Syrophoenician woman is because they weren't in the covenant with the Jews. So, Jesus did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and implored him, saying, send her away because she keeps shouting at us. But he answered and said, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and began to bow down before him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered and he said, it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. How's that for a warm fuzzy? We're not going to see anybody embroider that on a pillow, I don't think. You know, that's kind of harsh. Why would Jesus do that? But then she said, yes, Lord, but even the dogs feed from the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Then Jesus said to her, O woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you wish. And her daughter was healed at once. So here's something I want to be careful because there's a lot of different opinions about end time stuff. But I'm going to make a position here that a lot of people will teach out of Daniel chapter 9 that talks about prophetic weeks, which is 7 years, and that, and he will make a covenant with the people for 1 week. Well, one interpretation of that, a lot of people want to make that the Antichrist, but it doesn't say Antichrist anywhere in Daniel 9. But it says that, he will make a covenant with people for 1 week. Well, what's 1 week? 7 years. And then in Daniel 9, it says, and halfway through that, 3.5 years. And if somebody disagrees with me, that's fine. This is just another opinion out there, one I kind of like. But so halfway through that week, 3.5 years, the Messiah will be cut off. Well, here he's saying, I only came to the house of Israel. We're just starting to see him shift to messages about Gentiles. We've already covered that. But he's only come to the house of Israel. Why? Because he had a covenant with Israel for 1 week. How long was his ministry on the earth? 3.5 years. And then he was crucified. And then at the end of 3.5 years, it caused sacrifices and oblations to cease. So what happened after he was crucified? The curtain in the Holy of Holies was rent in two, and we had a different world. So could be that he was the one that made a covenant with people for 1 week, which makes sense in Daniel 9 because it says it's talking about the Messiah. It's not talking about the Antichrist. So anyway, just something to think about. So this really could be speaking of that. But now let's talk about the harshness of, it's not right to give it to the dogs. Why would he do that? Well, one of the reasons is, context. The setting is at a dinner table when she comes. But here's something that's interesting when it talks about throw it to dogs. The language used here in the Greek was a dog that was defined as a pet. Jews called Gentiles dogs. So that was a cultural reality of how they spoke it. But Jesus used a different word for dog because dogs, in the case of the Jewish culture, was more like scavengers and just they didn't really own anything, But Jesus actually used a different word for dog, meaning pet, like an animal that was part of the household. So even though it sounds harsh, it was actually more inviting than what the Jewish culture would have allowed. And so it's showing his commitment to a covenant. And we'll keep that interpretation in other people's laps. But the thing about that is this was actually more endearing than she would have received normally from a Jewish culture. So that's interesting. So now let's move to verse 29. Unless anybody's got any questions, always interrupt if you do. But in verse
I still
29,
don't get that, Bill.
go ahead. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah, I still don't get that. Can you just say that another way? How it's actually more endearing?
Yeah, because the word for dog in the normal culture of the Jewish expression of that time was more like scavengers, like feral. dogs that don't belong here. Like
Yeah.
they are just they don't get anything. Just get rid of them, move them on.
Yeah.
But the word that Jesus used was more of one that is in our household, but not the one I'm supposed to be speaking to right now. So it was part of the household, but it's more like a pet instead of somebody that did not belong.
So when he's saying it is not good to take the children's bread, are we sort of meant to sort of treat that sort of literally, like the
Yeah, he was at
children's
a
bread
dinner
off?
table. So he
Yeah.
was kind of using it as a metaphor. I don't know about you, but my wife and I, we contend about not letting a dog eat from our plates, but
Yeah.
she breaks the rules a lot. But it was a reality of, primacy is the house of Israel. This other group is secondary, where the Jewish view is the other group doesn't even exist.
Mm.
So it actually is more inviting, like they're part of the household, but they are secondary. And that's what she's saying. True, Lord, but even the dogs eat the scraps from the table. He goes, yeah, okay, good answer. So what it was, she revealed a humility that was not that nobody was used to. And so, yeah, so that's the key thing about that is there's a little more softness in what Jesus said. It sounds harsh to us from our culture, but from a Jewish culture at that time, it was actually a merciful statement. I know it's
Mm.
still hard to it's still hard to chew, but
Yeah, no,
it's
no, that's
true.
all right. I actually think, well, I've had it sort of, I don't know if it's correct to interpret it metaphorically as bread being the equivalent of knowledge, because anything that sort of you receive, like food, is also like as knowledge as well.
Yeah.
And so
Oh,
is that,
absolutely. You like in the Lord's Prayer when it says, "Give us this day our daily bread." Wasn't just talking about food. He was talking about being dependent on God for everything.
hmm,
So bread is what makes life move forward. So the bread of life is the Spirit of God. It's the food He gives us. It's our prayer time. And that's what Jesus said many times. He says, "I am food that you don't know of," and that food is to do the will of my Father. Right. So
right?
100%. All right. Hey, Upton, good to see you join us, my friend.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of
Um,
course. All right. All right. So we're going to move to the next portion here. This is called the healing crowds. Departing from there, Jesus went along to the Sea of Galilee. And having gone up on the mountain, he was sitting there, and large crowds came to him, bringing with them those who were lame, crippled, blind, mute, and many others. And they laid them down at his feet, and he healed them. So the crowd marveled at this as they saw the mute speaking and crippled restored, and the lame walking, and the blind seeing, and they glorified the God of Israel. And Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I feel compassion for the people because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. I do not want to send them away hungry, for they might faint on the way. So here's the thing. A lot of people want to say this is talking about the same miracle he just talked about earlier that we dealt with in chapter 14, which was the feeding of the 5,000. It is not. It is a separate miracle, and I'll prove it here in a little bit. But what's interesting to me as we start reading this, they are so short-sighted. Their memory is very short because they have amnesia or something. Because they challenge him. They just saw him do this miracle, the 5,000, which was actually 15,000 when he acted with women and children. But now they kind of respond the same way. It's really fascinating. Is Yeah, I feel compassion for them. They've been here for 3 days. The 5,000 earlier was one day. Okay. And that was 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Well, then check this out. The disciples said to him, where would we get some loaves in this desolate place to satisfy such a large crowd? Well, I don't know. Maybe we can do the same thing we just did yesterday with the miracle of the 5,000 guys, you know? But it's like, how do we do this? Well, how did he do it yesterday? It just kind of blows my mind. And and so Jesus says to them very patiently, how many loaves do you have? And they said, 7, and a few small fish. Now, for context again, 7 loaves are like pita bread. They're very small, like what you make a falafel with. There's a little barley loaf. And then a few small fish were like smaller than like a sunfish. Okay. They have 7 and a few small fish. Feeding the 5,000 was 5 loaves and 2 fish. It was kids' lunch. And that's what I got to help people see. That was a child's lunch, 5 loaves of 2 fish. So they weren't big loaves. It wasn't like a piece of Wonder Bread. It was 5 little pita breads and 2 fish. And this is 7 with a few small fish. And he directed the people to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and giving thanks, he broke them and started giving them to the disciples. The disciples gave them to the people. And they all ate and were satisfied, and they picked up what was left over of the broken pieces, 7 large basketfuls. And those who ate were 4,000 men, besides women and children. So it's probably around 10 or 11,000 people when you included everybody. So, and then sending away the crowds, Jesus got into the boat and came to the region of Magadan. And I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit. But so again, just to remind us, version 1, they were with Jesus for 1 day. Version 2, they were with Jesus 3 days. It's 5 loaves and 2 fishes in version 1, 7 loaves and a few fish in version 2, 12 baskets left over in version 1, and 7 baskets left over in version 2. People say, oh, they probably just miscommunicated it. I'm gonna point out that is not the case. So it just shows that they were very short-sighted and not full of faith. Yeah, I can see a lot of us have more faith than they did in that way. So he's making the disciples look very human. Now, as far as going in the region of Magadan, that's on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. It was the birthplace of Mary Magdalene. That was where that whole place was. So I'm going to move into 16 now, because this is going to start bring us into a turning point in Jesus's ministry. So any questions or comments on that last passage of 15 before we move on? Okay, very good. All right, let's go back to it then. Oh, goodness, what did I do? There we go. Okay, so starting in chapter 16, the Pharisees and the Sadducees came up, and testing Jesus, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. So after all this, where they were contesting him and pushing back, now they're asking for a sign. But he replied to them, because he already said, leave him alone. He said, I'm not dealing with him. So he replied to them and said, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be stormy today, for the sky is red and threatening. I don't know if you ever heard of that in the maritime things. What was it? It was like red in the morning, sailors take warning. And red at night, sailors delight. So if you saw red in the sky at night, then it was going to be a calm day. Red in the morning. So this was a common point he's making out. Because when it's evening, you'll say it's going to be fair weather and the sky's red. And in the morning, there will be storms today, for the sky is red and threatening. Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, yet you cannot discern the signs of the times? And it says those signs, the word is kairos. It's not like that moment is talking about the season they're in. So this is a season of the visitation of the Messiah. An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and a sign will not be given except the sign of Jonah. And he left them and he went away. He didn't even explain that. But if you want to understand what the sign of Jonah was in the belly of the big fish. How many days? 3 days.
3. Yeah.
Right? So that's talking about the death, burial, and resurrection, about the execution of Jesus that will be coming very close. And the disciples came to the other side of the sea, but they had forgotten to bring any bread. They just had 7 baskets full. But he said something in response to that. Again, he had turned. He was no longer going to try to convince the Pharisees or Sadducees. He wasn't going to be answering the questions. He said to them, watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they began to discuss this among themselves, saying, he said that because we did not bring any bread. They're just so self-focused. He's mad at us for not bringing the bread. Jesus, aware of this, said, you men of little faith, you got short memory on 5,000 and 4,000 people being fed. Why do you discuss among yourselves that which you have no bread? Do you not understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets filled you picked up? Or the 7 loaves and the 4,000 and how many large baskets full you picked up? How is it that you do not understand that I do not speak to you concerning bread? It's because you're just worried about getting in trouble, I guess. But beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. He's starting to spell out for them the things that were kind of hidden before. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Then they understood that he did not say to beware the leaven of the bread out of a teaching or doctrinal issue, out of food, but out of the teaching and doctrinal issue of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Because if you don't know anything about bread, is yeast, leaven, this yeast, you put that and work that into bread, then it will permeate the whole loaf. Leaven leavens the whole lump, as I would say earlier. It is, in one sense, it is rises it so it makes soft bread that we like, but it's actually corrupting the original product. So that is the entire thing's been corrupted by the yeast or the leaven. So he's saying the leaven is most of the time in a biblical perspective considered a negative. And so they are, he's pointing out that everything they're teaching is deceptive. And deception is usually based on truth and twisted, which is what the Mishnah and the Talmud is in his perspective, from where they're following the letter of the law instead of the heart of the law. So now we're going to move on to, I know we're covering a lot of ground, so if there's any questions, do not hesitate. Why is this not moving? My notes are not moving. Hold on a minute. I'll just stay here. So in verse 13, and this is a really critical area. That's why I get this to move. There it goes. Thank you. I got my notes over here and on the side. All right. Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi. Now, this is 25 miles northeast of Caesarea Philippi is the base of Mount Hermon. I actually baptized people there right on the Jordan River, because Jordan River comes out of the melting ice and stuff, because Mount Hermon is a mountain. And so then we baptized people right there to Jordan River at the mouth of Mount Hermon, at the headwaters. And this is the mountain that we're going to see a lot of things happen here in the next few passages. This was the water supply for Israel, basically. And at that place, he was asking his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Whenever Jesus asks a question, it's not because he doesn't know the answer. It is for him to help us discover the answer greatly. Okay, so they said, some say John the Baptist. Now, one of the reasons we know that is because Herod Antipas said that, because he had killed John the Baptist, and when he saw the boldness of Jesus, he was freaking out, thinking that's John the Baptist come back alive to haunt me because of what I did to him. And so there was that word out there. But then the disciples said, and others say Elijah. Well, why would they say that? Well, because of Malachi 4. In Malachi 4, it says in verse 5, behold, I am going to send you Elijah the prophet before the coming and great terrible day of the Lord. And he will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with a curse. And then there was a tradition that was out there. This is still others like Jeremiah or one of the prophets. There was a tradition, not a biblical story, but it was a Jewish tradition that Jeremiah the prophet was going to return to Mount Nebo with the Ark of the Covenant, because that wasn't something that was a biblical text. It was more something that was being passed around as a tradition. And he said to them, okay, so something is going to be John Baptist or Elijah or one of the prophets or Jeremiah. He said, who do you say that I am? Simon Peter answered, said, you are the Christ, the anointed one, the Son of the living God. And Jesus said to him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. I also say to you that you are Peter, and that means Petrus, and upon this rock, because Petrus means rock, I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overpower it. Now, this is where we defer. This is where we separate a little bit on doctrine, Russ, just to let you know. The Catholic Church believes that this made Peter the first pope. Protestant position is different. Protestant position is that it was the ability to hear the voice of the shepherd, hear the voice of the Father. And because he said, flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you, but my Father revealed this. So this was revelation. And upon this, of knowing that you can discern this from the Spirit, that is why now I'm going to build my church, because we can hear the voice of the Father. I've reconnected you to the point where you can respond to the Spirit of God. And so upon that revelation and understanding of Jesus as the Christ, that is the foundation that I'm going to build upon. And historically, just to shock anybody else, I always thought Peter was the rock. He was the first pope. The leader of the church in the book of Acts was not Peter. It was James, his brother, Jesus' brother. So anyway, not want to debate it, but those are the two views, okay? And so the Protestant view is what I kind of attest to. But this foundation is referred to in Ephesians 2:20. So if you ever want to look into that, it would be verse 19. So when you are no longer strangers and aliens, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and are of God's household, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone. And so this is talking about this, the apostles and the prophets, the teachings of the church, and also those that have brought the revelation. So it really kind of leans into this whole thing of revelation. Then he says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And then he warned the disciples that they should, He warned the disciples that they should tell no one that he is the Christ. So again, going back to this, Christ meaning anointed one. That word literally means to smear with oil. So just covered with oil is that he is the one that carries that resting place. Now, the whole thing of what keys means, we can go back to Isaiah 22. You have been given the keys to the kingdom. Isaiah 22, it says, then it will come out about in that day that I will summon my servant Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, and I will clothe him with your tunic and tie your sash securely about him. I will entrust him with your authority. That was the pattern that they had learned in their culture. And he will become a father to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and to the house of Judah. Then I will set the key of the house of David on his shoulder. When he opens, no one will shut it. And when he shuts, no one will open. And that's going back to this thing of binding and loosing. There's a lot of debates on binding and loosing, but it really is pretty close. He's shutting that which we shut. It's opening that which is, is going to be open. You are walking in authority over everything that is in the kingdom of God. And that's something that's reiterated in Matthew 28.
Hey, Bill,
comments?
what was that passage again that you went back to in the Old Testament?
Oh, that was Isaiah 22.
Okay.
Starting with verse 19. So, any other comments or questions on that passage? Because the thing to me is the most profound thing, because when you look at what people want to define what the church is, he said, upon this rock, I will build my church. How I lay foundations for churches is I want to walk with somebody and I want to see that they're hearing the voice of the shepherd. How many times have you heard me say, the most gracious act a pastor can do is have their congregation learn the voice of their shepherd, right? Is when I know somebody's hearing God and they are following, and they see the scriptures as their plumb line on this is the character of God, I'm going to walk in this way. That's the foundation of the church. It just doesn't make sense to me that this was some man-made organization. Okay, so who's going to be in line for Peter? And this guy is the one that's going to run everything. With everything I've seen in the passages of scripture, everything he's talked about, even at the beginning of this study tonight, was he's focused in on the intention of the heart of man, the internal work. So the foundation makes so much more sense to me that he's going to build his church upon those that are responsive in their heart internally to the move of the Spirit that's going on inside them. That to me makes more sense than it being a man-made government. But that's just me. Okay. Any other questions on this? All right. So now we're going to get into some interesting stuff. We won't be able to finish it tonight. We're getting close here, but I want to leave us some time for discussion. But I'm going to try to get down to 26. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem. So here's the shift. He is now looking to go to Jerusalem to be crucified. He began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and the fact that he's going to be killed and be raised up on the third day. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid, Lord, this shall never happen to you. Okay, so what's interesting to me about that, what Jesus just said was, I need to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to suffer many things with the leadership there. They're going to kill me, and I'm going to be raised from the dead. Peter didn't listen to the rest of the sentence. He didn't listen to the resurrection. He just said, they're not going to kill you. I'm not going to let that happen. And so it's just, he obviously, he's one of those guys that, we know well, we know this for what we're going to read here next time in Mount of Transfiguration, but it's just like he said, not knowing what to say, he said, you ever had anybody that you're talking to and you can just tell by the way they're looking at you that they're just waiting for you to stop talking so they can talk again? You ever met anybody like that? I just met somebody like that today. So anyway, that's kind of Peter. He didn't even let Jesus finish the sentence, which was the greatest promise of mankind, that he's going to be raised from the dead. And he goes, God forbid it. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, okay, just at the last moment, he said, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. You are Peter, and upon this rock, I'm going to build my church. It's like, oh, that's a good job. And like 5 seconds later, Jesus' response to him is, get behind me, Satan. So which one is it? Well, it's neither. It's because it wasn't, I don't think it's the person. It's like he's talking about, you're listening to the wrong voice. You heard the right voice last time. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. But this one, you know me, I always talk about us getting everything out in the air so you see if it was God, it was me, or if it was pizza or the enemy. And so Jesus basically pointing out, you're speaking to the wrong source right now and talking to the wrong source. Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are not setting your mind on what God's interests are, but man's. Everything goes back to the inner thoughts. Everything goes back to the intention of the heart. It doesn't go to the outward expressions and behaviors. It goes to what moves me. And people will ask me sometimes, Bill, what do you do to just really immerse yourself in Scripture and it just doesn't become this routine? I go in and just ask God to show you what he wants to have move you. So you're getting reality. You're not just doing something because you're supposed to do it. Because that's the stuff Jesus is fighting for right now. Because Peter didn't hear him being raised from the dead. He was just told, he heard from God, and then he said, you are the Christ. But the opposite is said here. Get behind me, Satan. His thinkings were the work of the enemy. So now let's look at the cost of discipleship to close out today. I think that's a good way to end. Well, you know what? I'm gonna squeeze this in because the next part, I want to make a point. So I'm gonna take this all the way at the beginning of 17. When Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for his soul? So let's be honest. When's the last time you heard a sermon that was encouraging you to deny yourself? I'm not saying they're not out there, but how often do you hear it?
This morning.
Good. Jordan, I love to hear that. That makes me happy.
Yeah, the pillar. I don't know if you know the guy, Preston Morrison.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's the pastor of the church that I go to, and pretty much every weekend our message is to die.
Hallelujah. That makes me happy. Because my goodness, I was listening to another one. Somebody wanted me here because they thought it was really good. I said, what'd you think about that, Bill? I said, it just makes me want to cry. Why? Because there's no, there's no cost. It's discipleship is our destiny is to die to self. That's our promise, guys. That's where our freedom is to deny ourselves and take up our cross. Okay. So there's two approaches to life: denying yourself and taking up the cross, or denying the suffering and deny your cross. So people say, do you like those name it, claim it, and have it, grab it, success oriented preachers? I think I just answered that. I'm not a fan. It is to deny ourselves and take up the cross, because that is where our destiny comes from. That's when we're going to be in complete agreement with him. Okay, so what he says now at the end of this, truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Now, everybody, I remember going into Bible studies and they're saying, yeah, so what was it? How did that happen? If they didn't see him come in his kingdom, then why did he say that? Was that a false prophecy? No. This is one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of how they broke the Bible up in chapters. I'm grateful they did, so it's easy for us to find verses, but they really goofed up when they did this one, because this is fulfilled in the next verse of 17. Truly I say to you, there are some of those who are standing here who will not taste death. Remember, they're on Mount Hermon. They're in Caesarea Philippi, which is right there near Mount Hermon. That's where they are geographically here. Truly I say to you, there will not be some that will taste death until they see the Son of Man come in his kingdom. Now look at the very first verse of 17. And we'll just do, this first passage. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John, his brother, and led them up on a high mountain. It was Mount Hermon, just so you know, by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his garments were white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with them. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good. Actually, my favorite translation says, not knowing what to say, Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 tabernacles here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Isn't that a great idea? Nope. Now, a couple other things I want to add to this, because I will fight tooth and nail. This is Mount Hermon. It wasn't Mount Tabor. If you go to some prayer tours in Israel, they'll say Mount Tabor is where this happened, or Mount Tabor. No, it was that's the Jezreel Valley. That's not near Caesarea Philippi. That would be just a few days walking distance to get to Mount Hermon. So Peter's suggestion was 3 tabernacles. What did he just do by saying that? He was putting Jesus at the same level as Moses and Elijah. He was creating Moses and Elijah's idols and not really seeing the preeminence of Jesus as the Messiah. So I'm not saying he intended to, but again, just with him not thinking things through, he just was lowering Jesus to what we can understand, which is my battle with a lot of Western Christianity, is we lower Jesus to our understanding. And I don't want to say this be harmful or irritating. A little bit, the series The Chosen, I don't hate it. I'm just not a huge fan, because it's trying to make Jesus, lower him down to where it fits us, and I don't want him to fit us. That's part of my beef. I'm not saying don't watch The Chosen. Go ahead. I'm just saying I just love the preeminence and the magnificence of the majesty of God, and I don't want anything that diminishes that. So he's telling 3 booths, but then, he says that while he was still speaking. So they're like, I didn't want to listen to the rest of Peter's sentence. It says, a voice came out of the cloud, which was the Father's. This is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. Period. It's like, no, I don't want you to be celebrating Moses and Elijah. They're here to hear from him of what he's doing. He's transfigured into his glorious state that he be as he is outside of the human realm at this moment. I do think this was also why Peter was talking about Feast of Tabernacles was, I think this was taking place around the month of Tishri, which would have been the fall, which would have been near the Feast of Tabernacles. And so that is something that I think is one of the reasons he was thinking about tabernacles. But when the disciples heard this, they fell face down on the ground and were terrified. And Jesus came to them and touched them and said, "Get up and do not be afraid." And lifting up their eyes, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. And I'm going to close just with this thought, and then we might retouch this as we step on to the next passage next time, because this really gets into some rich stuff on transfiguration. But Hebrews chapter 1, I think, is a great way to state this in Peter. Well, we don't know who the writer of Hebrews was, but in Peter's perspective, what we just saw. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers in the prophets, in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. So on that note, we will close out. Any questions or comments before we close out the study?
Just have one question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts, probably not this time, regarding the whole binding and loosing thing.
Oh, yeah.
You and I both have been around the world with that kind of stuff, but
Yes. Yeah.
I would like to hear your take on that.
Yeah. We won't have time today, but I'll start with that next time. But yeah, I should have spent more time on that. So we'll do that. We'll tie up all the loose ends on here and keep going on this whole thing of transfiguration, because this is more profound than people realize. But everybody just wonders, what happened. This was fulfilled 6 days later. This is a fulfilled prophecy that Jesus spoke. And so that doesn't have to be fulfilled any longer. It's done.